We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.
Good morning, and welcome to the Monday Mashup. This is Robert Phoenix, and I'm here to help you ease gently into the morning or the rest of your day, wherever you might be listening to this broadcast from, and into the rest of the week. It is the 10th of September, the sandwich day between 9/9 and 9/11. The Illuminati clock ran out last night at 9:09 on 9/9, and we're still here. Now, that doesn't mean that maybe some Stargate opened somewhere in the world that we're not aware of, and an army of multidimensional demons came pouring through. But in terms of the physical reality, the third dimensional domain, things are more or less the same. Unless you're a Packer fan, in which case your world is in a world of hurt right now, because my San Francisco 49ers came in and took care of business. That's right. Mad props to the Knight Templar himself, Jim Harbaugh, for taking his troops into Lambeau Field, hallowed Lambeau Field, and putting it on the Packers. So while Rome burns and Obama is singing Al Green, I am still the undisputed master of fantasy football, as my fantasy football team crushed my opponent this weekend. I'm telling you, with my principles, my fantasy football principles, you give me an army of standing troops and I could rule this world. No, it wouldn't be that easy. But anyway, here we are. It is the 10th of September, and we are on the back side of the, excuse me, I'm just going to adjust my high quality microphone here. We are on the back side of both the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. I did not watch either. I have watched highlights or lowlights, depending upon where your perspective is. I definitely think one of the highlights was Clint Eastwood's chair speech. That was incredible. I mean, no matter what the Democrats rolled out, Scarlett Johansson, Foo Fighters, I'm not a Republican, but I got to tell you, that chair speech was amazing. I mean, it was so utterly naked and vulnerable, and the timing was exquisite. I mean, here's Clint Eastwood, this tough guy, right? I mean, Clint Eastwood personifies tough. He's a Gemini, by the way. We're going to get into Gemini a little bit later in this broadcast today. We're going to talk about the Gemini effect in the Democratic National Convention and a few other aspects as well. Clint Eastwood is a Gemini. He's born May 31st, which is the same birthday as Walt Whitman and Brooke Shields. And he got up there and did a very Gemini kind of thing, right? He had a dialogue with a chair, nobody in the chair. That was so Gemini. It was like that was typically Gemini. It was so symbolic. It was like 2 is 1, but not really 1. You know what I mean? Ellis and I talked about this on Friday. And apologies for the audio. I don't know what happens when I talk to Ellis or Jay Widener. But generally speaking, it is challenging with these heavyweight guests. Now, I don't know. Anyway, the upshot, the most positive thing about the Ellis interview was that we talked about doing a webinar with him and his science of numbers, and I think I'm going to do my best to convince him to do that, although we're going to have to get a better internet connection for him. So if you really liked Ellis's work on Friday, please support him and get a numerology reading, because those numerology readings would go towards the purchase of a really sturdy computer for him so he can continue to assist people in this world. LSCtaylor.com, that's his website. And I urge you, he's a master. The guy's an absolute master. So getting back to the Eastwood thing, it was brilliant, actually, totally brilliant for him to go up there and talk to a chair. Very Gemini as well, extremely Gemini. I don't agree with everything he said, by the way. I know, I agree with maybe 70% of it. But the whole Gitmo thing, I did not agree with at all. Nope. It was really funny, too, because Eastwood, a couple weeks earlier, had come out and made a statement about gay marriage. And he said, does it really matter who people marry? And, oh, my God, the progressives and the liberals love that. Oh, love that. Oh, Clint, good for you, man. He-Man, you're a tough guy. Look at you. You're so okay with the gay marriage thing. Right on. Right on, brother. Let me give you a hug. And then he comes out with the chair speech. It's like, whoa, I don't know about that. I don't know about you now. It's so confusing. You're pro-gay marriage, and yet you're talking to a chair, and I don't know. This is all too much for me. I love that. It was a great moment of that convention. And I watched that speech, by the way. I did. I watched it I watched it after the fact. If it's real time when you see something, when you watch it after the fact, is it unreal time? Think about that. And then I watched Obama's speech, and I watched part of Clinton's speech. And what can I say about Obama's speech? It's more of the same. It's like promise number 2, or series of promises number 2. And now putting the burden of change on you, the people. You are the change. Michelle says, well, you're going to have to give up. You're going to have to give something up. It's like, the country is really hurting. And now it's up to you. And if you don't give it up, you're a shitty American, essentially. So we're calling on you. We're calling on you to give it up. And I talked about this the other day on my show. It's, I'm telling you right now, they want to go for 50% tax in this country. And let me just say this. If we get to a place 6 months from now, and we're still having this discussion about taxes, and if Obama's in office, and we're still having this discussion, and the whole point of negotiation is that we need this in order to keep Social Security alive and keep the social safety nets alive, we're going to need more of your money. I'm going to be honest with you. We're going to be in a good place if we're having that discussion. And it's not because, this is something that I believe in, that we need to have a government on steroids in order to support the lack of industry and the lack of production in this country. That's not what I'm talking about or meaning. What I'm talking about or meaning is that if we're having this discussion 6 months from now, that means the economy hasn't completely bottomed out and the troops have not been called in to quell any kind of dissent, which, by the way, is a big area of chatter right now on the internet. I could point you to any number of sources if I wanted to. And you could go out there and you could find people who are connected to the military or they're connected to local police forces, or they're connected to local sheriffs, or they're connected to the National Guard, all four nodal points, and they will tell you that there are huge contingencies being drawn up right now for the potential scenario of an economy that's bottomed out, which would take place after the election, by the way. Of course, it would be after the election. Now, here's the deal. Let's look at the election. All right, let's stare this down for a second. What would that mean? Well, you don't really want to think about it. I mean, if you do think about it, it's daunting. It really represents the end of America as we know it, okay? And I'm just being straight up with you. And I'm not advocating it. I'm not predicting it with a sense of glee and standing up on top of a platform or pulpit and saying, you better listen to me or else. I'm telling you that this is a possible scenario, a very possible scenario, because of where things are financially. They're terrible beyond belief. But what's interesting too is that that's abstract, and that's an illusion anyway. I mean, it's an utter illusion. And this is where the world and this domain and this dimension gets really weird, because the economy is a complete and utter illusion. It's a falsehood. Money has no value. It's only perceived value, and they just print it. And the problem is that you and I don't have the presses, so we don't have the available funds in order to do that. And there's nothing backing it up. Everything that's backed that money up, that's gone probably 10 times over for the next 6 generations, okay? So everything is on fumes now. Everything is all on speculative fumes and quantitative easing. So any kind of collapse around that is a complete and utter falsehood, because it's all illusion anyway. And the game has already collapsed, if that's the case. And right now we're living in a dream. But let's say the nightmare continues and all of a sudden everybody pushes the panic button, and after the election, the bottom drops out. Then what? Well, I'll tell you what, it won't be pretty. It won't be pretty, because there are a lot of people in this country that have reached their maximum point of saturation in terms of what they're able to take. And that's just the way it is. And there have been a number of bills passed that are designed to criminalize dissent. And Chris Hedges had a big interview on Alex Jones. You can find it on the internet. You can listen to it. I wholeheartedly recommend you do that, because Chris Hedges is one of the coolest, most even-handed heads in this country. He's a progressive. He's a liberal. If you love Obama, if you love your progressive politics, you go listen to that interview, and you'll come away from that interview shaking your head. And I'm going to get into the Obama effect here in a second, because it's really it's discouraging. It's not discouraging. You could put anybody, any face in there. It could be Obama. It could be Clinton, whoever you're going to stick in there in that spot. But Obama is particularly intriguing because of the manufactured quality of his nature, manufactured matrix that he represents. I mean, he's a synthetic figure. He's a synthetic character. And I've talked about this quite a bit on the show. He's not real. He's not real. There's nothing about him that's really real. I mean, maybe you could touch him and have you seen how skinny he's gotten lately, by the way? And this guy is a rail. If you go back and you look at that first picture of Obama that everybody remembers, what is your first memory of Obama? Really? I'll tell you mine, because I'm not a guy that watches the Democratic National Convention or the Republican Convention for that matter. But most people's first memory was of him giving this speech at the DNC, and this was when Gore was being nominated. And everybody was singing his praises, the rising young star. I remember that. I remember people talking about him. Oh, this Obama guy. Oh, Obama. Oh, my God, you should have heard that speech. But I've tempered those moments because I remember Jesse Jackson giving that same kind of speech. Oh, Jesse Jackson. Oh, Jesse Jackson. These people are, they're master orators. And it's even easier when you've got a great teleprompter. But they're master orators. Jerry Brown. I remember Jerry Brown giving an amazing speech. Oh, Jerry Brown. Oh, my God, Jerry Brown. Howard Dean gave a great speech. Giving a great speech does not mean you're going to be a great leader. Trust me. There are lots of people that can really speechify. You sit them down and put them in a position where they're supposed to lead, and they're not very good. And there are people who are lousy speechifiers, and you sit them down, and they know what to do. They're just not really that concerned about how they appear to the world. What they're more concerned about is how to get things done. And unfortunately, we have not had somebody in office like that for quite a while. And I'm not even sure it's possible now. So anyway, we have the Obama effect, and it's been fascinating to watch. And his speech was more of the same, really. And Bill Clinton, of course, stole the show. He was the fluffer. That's what his role was. If you know what a fluffer is, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what a fluffer is, you can search for it on the internet. It's basically, a fluffer is a person, a woman, most of the time, who is on a set for pornographic movies. And her role is to fluff the male actor up so that he can then go in and perform for the woman who is not the fluffer. Because a fluffer has an amazing skill. So Bill Clinton was the fluffer. And he got everybody, nice and juicy for Obama. And it's amazing to see how people just completely and utterly are entranced by Bill Clinton to this day. And the trance effect, of course, is also very pronounced and transferable over to Obama. I could do a whole show on Clinton. I mean, it would not be pretty. It would not be pretty at all. I mean, we could start with the amount of people that died around Bill Clinton. Huge. Most of them. I'll tell you, okay, I'll tell you two things about Clinton. And then you can wrap your head around the implications of this. All right? So let's go back in time to Waco and the Branch Davidians. How did all that start? Well, here's how it started. David Koresh was selling guns, which, by the way, he had a permit to do in the state of Texas, which, by the way, he was doing in conjunction with local law enforcement. David Koresh was completely legal about what he was doing. And I'm not advocating anything about David Koresh or the Branch Davidians. I believe that David Koresh was a victim of mind control. He might have even been replaced. If you get into the nuts and bolts of the Branch Davidians and David Koresh, it's a very strange, interesting story. He came into the Branch Davidians as the protege of the woman who was sort of the maternal figure behind the Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians were not started by David Koresh. They were started by a married couple, an older married couple whose names completely escape me right now, but you can find them on the internet. But here's the story. He came in, he apprenticed with these two people. They had somehow anointed him to be their savior, that he was going to be the second coming of Jesus Christ. And when he first started out as being the sort of the anointed one, he was incredibly awkward. His ability to deliver scripture was challenged, to say the least. He was bumbling. People use the word bumbling in conjunction with his name. Now, what happened was, and this is really interesting, is that these two people who set up the Branch Davidian compound in Mount Carmel, Waco, they left the country and they went to Australia, and maybe they were trying to do the same thing in Australia. But David Koresh actually left the compound and went to Australia to spend time with these people, further religious instruction or whatever. And he goes there, and essentially what happens is he winds up having an affair with the woman, the matriarch behind the Branch Davidians. He has an affair with her. And her husband did not take to it kindly. And David Koresh and the husband had a gunfight in Australia. Now, they were able to do this because Australia had guns then. They don't have guns anymore. But they had a gunfight, and it was ruled that David Koresh was defending himself, legally defending himself. And he killed the founder of the Branch Davidians. This is completely, by the way, edible. Completely edible. And he really falls into line with Dionysus. He becomes Dionysus at this point. Just like Jim Morrison, sings about in the end. This is what he does. I'm going to use some very strong language here. He fucks his mother, who is the head of the Branch Davidians, and he kills his father, who is the spiritual head, the spiritual father and spiritual mother. He fucks the mother and kills the father. Guess what? Guess what happens? It's a sacrifice. It's a ritual sacrifice. And then he comes back to Texas, and now, check this out, he's a different guy. He's not the same guy that he was before. Now, he looks the same, but he is not the same. This is a guy now who can quote scripture with ease. He can hold people rapt and focus on whatever it is he's saying. He transformed into a prophet at that point. And he was a very charismatic figure, not the same guy that went to Australia, not at all, not in the least. So now he comes back and he starts really, amping up this notion of having a spiritual compound, a haven, to hang out in while the rest of the world goes to hell. And then the rapture takes place. It's all part of his plan. And he actually goes to Los Angeles. Because this David Koresh, Vernon is his name, right? Vernon. He went from Vernon to David. Think about that. He goes to Los Angeles, and he starts hanging out. This is during the metal era, the hair metal band era in L.A. He starts hanging out on Sunset Strip, and he brings like the two hottest of the Branch Davidian girls with him. And he tries to get these rock and rollers from the hair metal scene in LA to come and live with him in the compound because he wants to start this kind of gospel rock and roll Disneyland compound where he's God in Texas. And he was. The guy was. He was God there. And he had sex with all these different women. Some of them were quite young, too, 14, 15 years of age. And there were babies, and there were obviously lots of mind control techniques being played out. He was separating families. He was taking away the power of all the males. Essentially, what David Koresh was doing, he was not living out the life of Jesus. He was living out the life of Solomon. He was actually manifesting this Solomonic kind of existence with all these wives, and and that was his temple. Temple of Solomon was the Branch Davidian compound. And I'm of the mind that there was it wasn't just archetypal. He wasn't just Dionysius reincarnated as David Koresh. I believe that there was some form of mind control going on there, and that the Branch Davidians were a version of Jonestown. And I'm not going to get into Jonestown because that would take me another couple hours to break that down. But it was, what was Waco a limited hang? Quite possibly. So what happens now is he's back. He's got his rock and roll religious Solomonic, kingdom and harem going on there. And he's doing deals with the local constabulary for guns. It's all legal, by the way, and they all like him there pretty much. They have no beef with him. And what comes out are some of the stories about the mistreatment of kids, and there is stories about abuse and all that stuff. And that may or may not be true. But I've noticed that whenever they want to go and flesh somebody out, like, the guy who is the Mormon, the head of the Mormon compound, same thing. And yet, there's all these eyes wide shut parties going on. Who the hell knows what else? Anyway, I don't even want to get into that. But this is what they use. And it could be true. I'm not saying it isn't true. It could be true. But and at some level, there's some level of consent going on inside those walls. I don't think anybody really knows what was taking place. Now, was he a saint? No, he was no saint at all. He was a psychopath, and he was not a good guy. He was just not a good guy. But that doesn't mean that what happened there is justifiable. Not at all. So now they've got some people that have come out of the woodworks, so to speak, and they've said, well, yeah, this is going on, and then that got blown up, and then of course you have the gun thing. They're stockpiling the weapons, but at the same time he has this license to sell, so that's going on. Now all of a sudden it becomes an issue. Let's go in and get him. And there was kind of a siege mentality, like, okay, well, things are kind of heating up. We may have to get prepared for this. But then the ATF comes in. And here's where it gets really interesting, and why I got to this point because of Clinton. The raid on the compound takes place. And there's actual footage of this. You can find footage of this, which I find amazing. And I believe it's been a while since I got into the actual numbers. I believe there were 5 people that went into that compound. You can actually see them go through a second-story window. Okay, 5 people. 4 of those people were former bodyguards of Bill Clinton, Arkansas State Troopers, who are now working for the ATF. And 4 of them go into that compound. And the one guy who is not is the leader, and he's the first to go in. Okay? He's the first to go in. And then out of those 4, 3 of the guards, former guards, are killed. The 4th is hospitalized, and I don't know whatever happened to that person. And this is what spurs the siege, is that moment. Now, first of all, if you want to get into the legality of it, I don't think it's legal for them to do that. And if they're on the other side, they theoretically have the right to defend themselves against that. I mean, there is such thing as posse comitatus, or there was. There's not anymore. But let's say it's not. Let's say everything they did was legal. That's not to say that that's how it went down. Now, 4 bodyguards of Bill Clinton get taken out, in that moment. And I'll stop right there. I'll let you fill in the blanks, okay? And this becomes the impetus to begin the siege on the Branch Davidians and eventually level the compound. And there are people that wanted to come out, by the way. And this is horrific. This is one of the worst scenes in the history of America, as far as I'm concerned. No matter what you believe or what you think about these people, whether you think that the Christians are wackos and nuts, or whether you think that he was a pedophile and he was involved in heinous acts in there, you don't do that. I don't care. You don't light a place on fire and burn women and children to the ground and then run over the debris with a bulldozer. You don't do that. Sorry. So a lot of the information around Waco, the testimony from the trial, and all that stuff was housed at a place called the Murrah Building in Oklahoma City. And one of the people that died during the explosion was a guard there who was a former Arkansas State Trooper. So here we have at least 4 Arkansas State Troopers that are gone. And I don't even want to go into the laundry list. But the amount of people that died around Bill Clinton was epic. One of his best friends, Ron Brown, who was the head of the Democratic National Committee, died. He was on a plane going over to Bosnia, Serbia, and that plane went down along with a bunch of other people. I mean, the body count around Clinton is staggering, and yet people, all they want to do is just fall in love with these idols. It's like we live in an American Idol fairyland. It's a matrix. You know, we have elevated people to the point where they're gods, and people are not gods. They're human, or maybe we'd like to think they're human. Maybe there's something else. But certainly, the notion that they are deities is just ridiculous. And I saw this after the convention and what people were doing to Bill Clinton, and it bugged me. It really bugged me. It's just the amount of persuasion and playing upon people's predispositions and hopes and aspirations is so cynical. Incredibly cynical. And now people got all fired up and they're ready to reelect Obama. Thanks in part to this man, Bill Clinton, who is one of the greatest lies of the 20th century in terms of who he was, what he did. You know, if we look, Bill Clinton and his people, Larry Summers, they were the guys that created Glass-Steagall. And it's Glass-Steagall that got everybody in trouble. And if they wanted to change it, they would reinstate Glass-Steagall, by the way. But they don't want to do that now. And, you know, people, you know, lay this on Bush. Well, it was Clinton who brought Glass-Steagall into being. And if you don't know about Glass-Steagall, look it up. It basically was the foundation for the housing crisis in this country. It's where you could be a busboy and go out and buy a $350,000 house with no stated income. And why is that? Well, it's because the bubbles had ceased. It was the second to last bubble. The third to last bubble was the toxic debt bubble. We had the tech stock bubble, the housing bubble, and then the toxic debt bubble, which was the negative amortization of the housing bubble. And people still profit on it. They don't care. Toxic debt, who cares? We're still going to make money off this. It's an asset. Doesn't matter if it's an asset that's underwater. It's still an asset. Somebody's going to buy it. Some sucker out there is going to buy it. Why? Because somewhere down the line, somebody else is going to buy it. See, this is how debt works, by the way. Now, here, I'll give you a kind of an example. Let's say you have an outstanding bill. Okay, you have an outstanding bill, you can't pay it. Well, the people that you owe the money to, they will try to collect on it. And if they don't, after a period of time, and they have a clock, and that clock basically says, hey, look, after this amount of time, you're now losing money. So you may as well sell that debt. So then they sell the debt to somebody else. And somebody else has to collect on that debt. And they've got a clock. And then somebody else has to sell that debt and buy it. And so finally you get to the bottom. Then there's the bottom feeders who buy millions of dollars of debt on for pennies. Pennies. And then they sit around and they have a call center in India. And then somewhere, even down the line, there's probably somebody else making money off something that is no longer amortizable. And this is how it works. People still make money off of toxic assets. I'll never forget, one time I was on a plane flying to Germany, and I sat next to this guy for 8.5 hours, whatever it was, 9 hours. And we talked at great length. It was a fascinating, absolutely fascinating conversation. In many ways, this guy typified the American dream. He was Jewish, he was from Russia, and he came here with pretty much nothing. However, let me say this, because I know that the Jewish Russian population that comes here, and the only reason I know this is because I have a group of friends who are from Russia and Jewish, and I understand the benefits that they have once they get here, and they do have significant benefits, by the way. They all get stipends. They get stipends. Everything gets easy. They have lots of low interest grants and loans, and it's amazing what these people have coming to them. I mean, they get checks for life. I'm not shitting you, okay? So they come here. It's not like they come here with nothing. I mean, they may come here with very few possessions and not a lot in savings, but during the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, which is when this influx of Russian Jews in this country occurs, they were deeply taken care of and accounted for. It was like, okay, we're going to make sure you get your feet on the ground and get up and running. I know this for a fact. They had health care. This is fact. Okay, so he came here with nothing, but he came here with a lot of support for a long time. Now, he didn't sit on his ass. He worked hard. He went to school. He studied computers. Good for him. And he went to Stanford, and he got a degree in computers, and he's making a boatload of money. Why? Because he developed a form of software that analyzes debt, and he analyzes collection, and he analyzes who the best bets are to collect on. That's what he does. And he sold that software, and he made millions of dollars. And then we had a very interesting talk. We talked about how much he loved Ashland, Oregon. He said, oh, I love Ashland, Oregon. And it's beautiful there. There's the Shakespeare Festival. Oh, it's lovely. It's like, well, why don't you move there? Oh, I cannot. Well, why not? Well, there's a group of us in Palo Alto. We all live together. I would feel funny moving to a place where there is not a group of us. I get it. And he didn't want, basically what he was saying to me is he lived amongst a group of Russian Jewish expatriates who were quite wealthy, living in Palo Alto. I totally get it. I probably wouldn't move either. But he waxed poetically about Ashland, Oregon. We had a very interesting conversation. Very interesting. What kind of deep, actually. We talked about World War I, the Nazi threat, and all that stuff. And then I talked about the Treaty of Versailles, reparations, and had they not had these crippling reparations, there's probably a pretty good chance that Hitler doesn't rise to power, in which case World War II is averted. But that's a different story for a different show. So people are high on Obama now, and they're really, really into it. Facebook has been incredibly depressing, to say the least. I'm just watching people lose their minds. Just lose their minds. Oh, I love him. He's the best. Oh, Michelle, she's great. And look, Romney is no walk in the park. Romney is a cold-hearted son of a bitch. He is. You know, and Paul Ryan is an oddball. Paul Ryan has these ideals that on paper sound great, but he's an Aquarius sun, Mercury Aquarius, Libra moon. Paul Ryan's a cold fish. You know, Paul Ryan can be chilling, absolutely chilling. What's interesting about Paul Ryan is he's the first Pluto and Libra guy to come into the political mix. He's the first member of Generation X, which is fascinating, really fascinating. At least he's got Pluto and Libra, you know, he's got the fairness thing going on. But I'm just watching people lose their heads over Obama, and it's troubling. So one of the things that I did is I looked at the chart for the two main speeches for Obama, and the first was the nomination speech, which is fascinating, and that took place on what was it, the 6th? And at that time, when the speech goes off, Gemini is on the ascendant, and Jupiter and Vesta and Ceres are all conjunct the ascendant as well. The ascendant at that point is at 15 degrees, and Jupiter is right on the ascendant in Gemini. So, of course, we know that Gemini is duplicity. It's a lot of things. It's duality. It's this quest to become one. Two is one. It's hermaphrodism and all that good stuff. So that's Jupiter and Gemini on the ascendant, and then right behind it is Vesta and Ceres. And Vesta means the flame. It's the flame. It's the eternal flame. And Vesta is a woman, and she's like the madam of the Vestal Virgins. And the Vestal Virgins, they're all descended from nobility in the elite classes, and that's right there on the ascendant. And then so Vesta and Gemini. If we're looking at this from a feminine archetype or feminine perspective, Vesta represents urban women. These are women that are, smart, independent, accomplished. That's Vesta. And then right behind Vesta is Ceres, and Ceres is the natural woman. This is probably more along the lines of the sort of the green women, women that are into organic foods and green bohemianism is what it's called now. And they're right there. They're right on the ascendant. So there's the evocation of the energies of these two types of archetypes for women. And it's women that respond very passionately towards Barack Obama. So during that nomination moment, what was happening here is we have the invocation of two types of the modern woman, the natural or the organic woman and the urban and the intellectual, quote-unquote, woman. And they're all there, right there on the ascendant. And then there's Jupiter, which is interesting because Jupiter in Gemini is a real mixed bag. It's clever, it's sharp, it's verbose. It is trivial in many ways. It traffics in trivial matters. It divides and conquers. It's Gemini is all about subdivision and breaking things down into their fractal components. And Gemini and Jupiter tends to expand that, and so all of those details just get either amplified or obscured, and you begin to lose sight of the big picture. And you start to get down into these fine points, into these trivial points, like Michelle's dress or something like that. You see the dress Michelle was wearing, she looked great. That would be a Jupiter and Gemini kind of moment. But it's not having the big picture. It's not being able to look down and say, well, look at what's happened over the last 4 years. This has been a disaster. People say, well, he didn't have a chance, he got blocked by Congress. He had 2 years. He had 2 years where Congress was his. He had 2 years where the Senate was his. They had a majority. They could have done anything they wanted. They could have said, screw you. Here is our platform. Our platform is to end the war, close Guantanamo, and restore rights. And that didn't happen. And if you're a liberal progressive, you need to think about that. That did not happen because I guess it doesn't really matter that much to you. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter that much to you. This is the problem on both sides, by the way. Because on the liberal progressive side, they just want to feel good. And they don't want anything, they don't want anything, they don't want any blemishes to make them feel bad. That's negative, that's hateful, you're angry. And they'll just look the other way. They go into a cocoon of denial to feel good. They just want soporifics. That's all. Unless Michelle tells them differently, in which case they'll say, please take my money and I'll bend over because it's better for the country. Why? It's because Michelle is telling them. And on the flip side, on the Republican side, it's, people on the Republican side, they don't care either. I mean, maybe they care a little bit more. I don't know. I mean, I don't really hang out with Republicans. But they're all about security. They're all about going after, the next terrorist. Yeah, take away our freedoms because we got to get those bastards. Go more troops, more weapons, wipe them out, turn the Middle East into a parking lot. That's the Republican mentality. They'll go to war at the fucking drop of a hat. They don't care about rights either. All they care about is their money, the ability to spend their money freely and to stay out of my money. Not stay out of my business, stay out of my money. Those are the flashpoints for the Republicans. And it all gets glossed over. It all gets glossed over because everybody's vanity is being played to during these elections. The nominations. That's what happens. And, by the way, Obama, how many vacations has the guy taken? It's huge. He's going everywhere. If he's not going everywhere, he's playing golf, playing basketball. What a job. I'd like that job. I'd love that job. Now, I'd hate that job. But I'd like the hours, and I'd like the perks. If there's a small country out there that has the same kind of benefits and needs slightly, I don't know, what would you call me? Accessible, honest, leader for the people. Just give me a call. There's got to be a small, like who's running Maldives right now? I'd love to be the president of Maldives. Just get me out there. I'll turn Maldives into a world power, trust me. If I can do it in fantasy football, I can do it for Maldives. It all starts with Maldives for me. That's a funny name, isn't it? Maldives. Maybe I should find some other country. But this Maldives is so nice. I knew a guy whose name will not go mentioned here, but I knew a guy one time who had a very sweet relationship with the prince of a South Pacific island. And he actually brought this prince technology, like he built a radio station and stuff for him. And this prince gave him his own island. How cool is that? He had his own island, thanks to this prince. Guy had 5 passports from 5 different countries, by the way. I wonder how that happened. Anyway, yeah, if there's a small country out there, let me know. I'm your man. Where do we go from here? Oh, charts, right. Okay. So you're getting the idea, right? So if astrology, theoretically, is a gateway or portal to some form of invocation, which I believe it is, then what we had at that point during the nomination speech was this invocation of the forces of the feminine via Vesta, via Ceres. And it was really interesting because I put this post up on my website on Facebook about Paul Ryan being in favor of states' rights for medicinal marijuana, which is pretty much in alignment with what Paul Ryan might stand for. Being that he probably is weaned on Ayn Rand and, that whole, kind of libertarian ideology. But he came out and said, yeah, man, medicinal marijuana, states' rights. Well, Mitt Romney does not even want to even consider medicinal marijuana. He's down against medicinal marijuana. All he wants to do is promote synthetic marijuana because all of his cronies have patents on synthetic marijuana. They're the ones that are donating his campaign. And if he gets into office, I guarantee you synthetic marijuana will be the corner piece of Obamacare on some level. I think they'll sell a lot of it, okay? So he's not down with medicinal marijuana. And Ryan says, look, the state's sorted out. So we have two very different views, conflicting views. And then the third piece is Obama, who, has no position, but yet will send in the feds to close down dispensaries here in California. So that in and of itself is a position, even though it's not a formal position, okay? And I put this up on my website. I said, Facebook. 3 differing views, 2 of which are held by 2 people who are running together. This is interesting. That's all I put. I got to tell you, man, there are people that jumped in and they ascribed meaning to what I was putting up. And there's one woman who says, if Ryan gets elected, he's a disaster for all women on the planet. Okay, this is what I'm talking about, because there's nowhere in that thread that I say anything about wanting to elect Paul Ryan or Mitt Romney, nothing. And there's nothing in there about his position on women. This is all about medicinal marijuana and 3 different points of view. And yet this woman felt like she had to jump in and throw this piece in there about women and Ryan. And what I found interesting about the whole thing was like she was almost like an attack poodle, okay? She was like an attack poodle that is just trained to go out now and just attack this stuff and bring up the women issue, which is probably a valid issue. I think more than a women issue, it's a people issue, by the way, because I've seen how Paul Ryan treats men as well, and it's not great. Not. I don't think it's limited to women. It's a people issue. But I saw this. It was like go. It's like the programming got clicked on, the invocation of Vesta, the invocation of Ceres, bang. She was there, and it's like, no, this has nothing to do with what you're talking about. She says, I will go away. I will go away and not argue with you. Well, you won't argue with me because you're wrong. In this thread, you are fundamentally wrong. This is not what this thread's about. Now, if it was about women and treatment, yeah, chime in, but that's not what it was about. It was interesting just to see that, okay? It was interesting to see that. This is what I'm talking about with the invocation of Vesta and Ceres. And then I did another chart. And this is for his acceptance speech. And this was at the end of the acceptance speech. It was at 11:06 Eastern Standard Time. And at that point, it was 29 degrees Taurus on the ascendant, just about to come into Gemini. And there we have Black Moon Lilith, the moon, all conjunct in the sign of Taurus, which is at 29 degrees, it's the anaretic degree, it's the end of Taurus. And when we look at where we are in terms of this age is the culmination of the age of Taurus. Everything starts with the age of Taurus. It is the first signs of agronomy. It is the first sort of footprints of the goddess worship and goddess ritual, which is birth. These were civilizations that were heavily centered and focused around the organic assimilation of goods and fertility. And so, a very big part of, that time in the world, it was, I believe, 3600 BC, which is where they find the first goddess temple in Malta, which is a really interesting structure if you haven't looked at it. And it's very sophisticated. It's a Paleolithic structure of the goddess. And so it all starts there. And then the next, because we're coming out of this hunter-gatherer sort of phase, and we're going into the agricultural phase. And feminine cycles play a huge role in that. And then we move from that into the age of Gemini, And this is where the first sort of Grecian civilization or outpost shows up on Crete. And the age of Gemini is the age of civilization. So what we are here, we're at the end of the. It starts with the age of Taurus, and we're at the end of the age of Taurus now. And now, conceptually, this should be the age of Aquarius, right? This is what we're coming into. But if we are at the very backside of the end of the age of Taurus, this potentially would be the age of Scorpio. Now think about that for a second. The end of the age. It all starts with the age of Taurus, then this should be the age of Scorpio. I'm throwing it out there just for you to think about. But here in the chart, it's all 29 degrees, and then what follows it, of course, are the Gemini planets, the Gemini signs. Again, Jupiter, Vesta, and Ceres. 29 degrees, it's the end, right? Is the anaretic degree, and the anaretic degree is a torsion field. It's a flux field between one sign and the next. The other sign has not established itself, and the previous sign is just about out of juice. So it's like a torsion field. It's a portal. That's what the 29th degree is. It's a portal. So on the back side of that is Gemini, right? On the other side of the 29 degree ascendant and 29 Black Moon Lilith, 29 Moon, then you have Gemini, which would be really the inception of the new age of civilization. And if you go to 12-21-12, again, this is part of what I've been talking about, is that the galactic center is occluded by the sun and all these planets on the ecliptic plane, and the Earth is then cut off from the galactic center. And the most dominant or prevalent energy is the backside of the galactic center, which is Gemini. And Gemini then becomes really the focal point for the energy at that time during 12-21-12. And you play with all those numbers, and you get into really Gemini numbers. 2 is 1, 1 is 2, 2 is 1 and 2 is 3. It's all in there, right? So really what 12-21-12 is that it would be the rebirth of a new civilization, just like the sort of the birth of the age of Gemini on Crete. But it's still about duality. It's still about polarity. It is not about unification. It's just kind of a reset and a recasting of that timeline. So these speeches were very interesting in terms of their time. Oh yeah, Chiron was right on the it's right at the edge of the 10th and 11th house cusp on the acceptance speech. So it's entering into the house of Aquarius, or the age of Aquarius, and Chiron being the wounded healer of the Christ, opposed by the Sun and Mercury in Virgo. So interesting times, boys and girls. We are living in interesting times. If I were to take a guess right now, I mean, all the polls show that Obama is going to win. I don't know. It's a long road between here and November, and we all know that voting is a really spurious sort of activity in terms of how they're counted. So we've got these debates to go through and whole dog and pony show. Anyway, have a great week. I'll be back on Wednesday with Navigating the Astrological Matrix, and I'll be having 2 guests, hopefully, on Friday. One guest for sure, Rasa Von Warder, a.k.a. Kelly Everett's Stripping for God. She'll be here on Friday, and hopefully maybe one other guest as well. All right. Congratulations. You survived another weekend, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to discern what's possible. You've been listening to the Monday Mashup. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'll see you on Wednesday. Adios.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue reprogrammed, as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.